let's get started. Welcome for the last installment of the fall semester of VQMS. Today, we're so happy to have Davide joining us to share his recent work. As always, if you have questions for the panelists, you can feel free to unmute and ask. For all these other attendees, you can type your questions in the Q&A and we'll find the time to relay the questions to Davide. And we'll take an hour or so. And in the end, if you have further questions, we can stay for another 10 minutes or so for more informal discussions. With that, welcome and please take it away.
Thank you, Zelin. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks, Ayelet, for the invitation. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this paper with Brett and Poet. Poet is a PhD student at USC. Who did most of the work. We basically look at the financial consequence of sports gambling. So basically what happened after many states in the United States legalized sports gambling, which happened in the past few years. I'm going to give you some background about sports gambling, and then I will show you what we do in the paper. So let me close this. So if you're not aware, in 2018, the Supreme Court basically made sports gambling give the possibility to states in the United States to legalize sports gambling. After these decisions, about 38 states so far legalized some form of online sports gambling. And since the repeal, the sports betting has generated a lot of money in the United States. People spend about, consumers spend about 300 billions, and the states benefit through state government taxes with about 2 billion in revenue. This is what it looks like today in the United States. The red states all legalized some form of sports gambling. If we focus on online, we see that the majority also legalized online sports gambling. Why this is interesting? Because sports gambling, after legalization, a lot of, especially mobile apps, started rising and became pretty popular. There are over, by looking online a little bit, I don't bet, so I don't know much about this market, but by looking online a little bit, there are about 50 legal betting sites in the United States. Most of them have an app. What is interesting after looking a little bit into it is that they give you pretty nice incentive to start playing. So you get a lot of free money in order to play. And this incentive continue to come as you play. So they try to keep people engaged with the app and spend money and bet, which of course in some cases may lead to, addictive behavior and negative consequences, right? And that's why I think it's important to look at what happened when, many states allow this type of gambling. Just to give you an idea, this is the number of states that legalized over time on the y-axis on the right. Which line is the gray line? And the black line shows you how much consumers are spending over time. As you can see, we are spending tons of money on gambling. If we look at the literature, what is interesting is that so far, at least prior to this recent legalization, most of the research focused on, casinos, which are limited in a few states and jurisdictions, state-run lotteries, and if there was any sort of online gambling, would be through black markets, right? And this literature basically said, if we look at pre-legalization, we see that, surveys suggest about 68% of Americans engage some sort of gambling, which with 11% gambling over twice a week. This is a survey found by Siena College. So it says that 90% of Americans use sports gambling app. the majority of the users are these young men aged between 18 and 49. Okay. And roughly 60% of these users place a bet once a week. What the literature says is that about 1 to 8% of these, the consumers that gamble are actually what they define as problem gamblers, which are gamblers that, which are consumers for which gambling generated serious harm. And this harm can come in the form of financial stress, disruption of family life and relationship, health problems, issues with job performance, criminal activity, and even suicide. And again, this outcome seems to be more prevalent among young men and racial minorities and low-income individuals. Besides this literature that is pre-legalization, due to this, this legalization that happened in the United States, we have seen the rise of papers studying this phenomenon. In addition to our paper that exploit this legalization, there are two very recent papers. One is from Dan, which is here, and it uses credit card data. It looks at the same staggered adoption of these policies and shows that legalization increases irresponsible gambling, which is measured as a fraction of income spent on gambling app compared to the income. And of course, there are benefits for states because they see an increase in tax revenue, and this is actually the reason why states want to legalize this kind of this type of gambling. There is also another paper from Baker et al., again 2024. They also have access to credit and debit transactions for about 200,000 consumers. And what they find is that sport betting increases and substitute for saving allocations. So if I remember correctly, people stop putting money in the 401k and start spending more on investing. Credit card debt increases and available credit decreases. And they find that the effects are larger for households that are constrained financially, okay, which is kind of consistent with the literature pre-sports gambling. Finally, there is a paper by Couture et al. 2024 that actually look at what happened to mental health. And what they show is that there is an increase in the likelihood of poor mental health for, after the legalization. And again, they find that this effect is mostly for young men. Okay, so all this literature is suggesting that the most affected part of the population seems to be men, young men between 20-ish and 40 years old. So what we do in this paper, we add to this literature and we study what happened to the financial health of these consumers for the overall population in the United States. And also we look at some heterogeneity analysis by specific group to see whether our results are actually consistent with either surveys or this recent research showing that a specific part of the population is more affected. Okay. So answering this question requires financial consumer data, and that was the hard part of the paper, I think. And I think we started thinking about this question a few years back, but a recent conversation with Brett made me discover that UCLA have access to very nice data. And this data comprises basically an anonymized individual level record of national representative or 2% of the US population with a lot of information about their financial history. Okay, and this is actually what we needed to study this question. We have about 7 million panelists. We observe outcomes at what we say quarterly level. These are not quarterly average or estimate. They're basically collected in March, June, September, and December. We refer them as quarterly, okay? In addition to yes, next question.
Could I just ask a quick question, and you can defer it if you're going to address it later, which is, excuse me, you're going to look at state level legalization across the rollout of legalization across states. can you tell us a little bit about, there's some states that have legalized and others that have not even now. What led states, which states legalized and why? Can you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I mean, I think the main reason for legalization is the tax revenue that you can get. There is a lot of benefit, right? As I show you, consumers spend like 300 billion in the past few years. 2 billion in tax revenue came into these the states that legalized. In addition to this, you can think that states that are more financially constrained can decide to legalize just to get more revenue in, right? I'm going to show you a little bit later the differences in some of the policies that these states implementing, including unemployment insurance, and whether there are differences across state, to give you an idea of which are the states more likely to implement. Spoiler alert, we don't find too many differences, only in a few measures, and I'm going to discuss this later, okay? A little bit more about the data. We observe all open and closed account for each individual. Again, this quarterly level combination. This data include pretty much everything from mortgages to the loans, auto loans, credit card, different type of loans, debt consolidation loans, collections, basically anything that happened to them. And I'm going to discuss some of these measures in more detail later because these are some of the outcomes that we're going to look. For the purpose of this paper, we restrict our panel to individuals who maintain at least one active account and are not deceased, okay? And now the final data set contains about 4.4 million unique individuals observation for about 4.4 million users and about 90 million quarterly observation over a period of 7 years from 2016 to 2023, okay? During this period, 33 states legalized some form of sports gambling.
Can I ask, Davide,
Yes.
how do you think about consumers who don't show up in credit data? Like, should we think of the problem gamblers as not coming from households that don't have credit reports, or
That's an interesting question. I mean, if they don't show up in the credit data, they don't have any sort of financial related account. I don't know how to think about these individuals. I don't know how much. So this means these individuals. Yeah, go ahead.
So my understanding of this panel is that while low income and minority populations are underrepresented in the credit reporting agencies, that this panel is designed to be representative of the full population. So they're sort of waiting to correct the underrepresentation issues that are in the sort of population level data.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, we had a discussion about this a few weeks ago, I remember now.
Just to add to that, so there are people who are completely not on the credit panel. That's kind of thing you cannot really do anything about. But there are also people that are called, like, have thin files. So if you look at the credit scores, they don't have like a typical score, but they have a special code. If you see those individuals, that may help to some extent.
The thin files or unbanked, I'm not sure we see them. But honestly, this kind of people, at least for the online gambling, you need some sort of credit or debit card, which means that these individuals cannot really play or bet. So I'm not sure this part of the population is super affected unless they spend a lot of money on offline gambling, which I don't know.
Yeah, there are some papers that talk about this credit invisible population.
Yeah.
It might just be worth checking them out.
I know about this. I don't know how big is this kind of invisible population in the United States, honestly.
It's actually not small. I worked with the credit report for quite a bit. If you just compare the overall populations with the sample size that you have, it's not small, but then I think it's difficult to just say too much about these other people just because
I guess the difficult thing, you cannot really track these people, right? So there is
Yeah,
no,
not from the credit bureau data.
Right.
Yes.
right. Got it. Yeah, probably these are not part of our sample. So let me talk a little bit about the treatment. These are the 33 states that are legalized during our observation period. As you can see, the adoption is, more or less staggered, starting June 2018, the first state, Delaware, and ending with Ohio and Massachusetts in January 2023. Most of the states legalized offline gambling, as you can see from the last column, and the majority of them legalize also online gambling. So in this paper, we're going to look at two different treatment types. The first treatment is what we call all state, which basically look at the first day in which the state legalized any sort of gambling. And then we focus on only online access, given the discussion that we had at the beginning about how big online gambling is getting, and how easy it is to get into it. I think is an important question to look into it, how online gambling is actually affecting financial health, because it's probably most of the gambling that is happening these days. Okay, let me spend a couple of minutes discussing the outcomes. We divide the outcomes in three groups. The first group is overall financial health, and for that we focus on the credit score. I'm sure every one of you knows what is a credit score, especially if you're not from the United States and you move to the United States and you realize you don't have a credit score, you cannot do anything. So it's basically a number that kind of assess your credit health. And it's a number that all financial institutions use to make decisions about whether to give you any sort of credit, okay? From loans to credit cards. The higher it is, the better. We then look at what we define as indicators of excessive debt, okay? And in this case, we look at bankruptcies, which basically when a bankruptcy happens and when a consumer is not able to repay outstanding debt. In this case, consumers in the United States, they can file for bankruptcy, which is basically a very serious decision that requires a consumer to go through the bankruptcy court and basically declare that he's not able to pay all the debt that he has, okay? We look at total amount of debt collection on account, which indicates how much unpaid debt consumer have, and it's assigned to collection agencies. Credit card and auto loan delinquencies, which are defined as missing payment on either credit card or auto loans, and are generally reported if consumers have missed the 1 to 2 monthly payments. Debt consolidation loans, which is a financial strategy for managing and reducing debt, which basically you have debt from many different sources. You can try to consolidate all the debt under one single account, which becomes generally more manageable. The third set of outcomes that we look are the ratio of secured to unsecured loans. So in the United States, there are two types of loans: secure loans that require collateral, and because they require collateral, they're generally offered to more riskier consumers. And then unsecured loans, which are the more typical loans for people that have good creditworthiness in terms of, for example, credit score. So we look at the ratio.
Clarification, Davide. I think I asked this question to Brett when he was presenting in our seminar a short while, not too long ago. But I forgot the answer. Does secured loans include home mortgages? Because I think they're secured and they typically are offered to less risky consumers on average, no?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Why mortgages will be part of secured loans?
Because they are against property, right? And so mortgages are a big proportion of, if not a majority of secured loans in the US are home mortgages.
Yeah.
Mortgages are on average given to less risky consumers, I would think, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. I honestly, I think you're right, because the house is
That's true. The
Yes.
mortgages are secured, but in the data, the mortgages are a separate category. So these are non-mortgage secured loans that is what we're calculating here.
Thanks. That clarifies.
Like these are personal loans that have required some kind of collateral.
Got it. Thanks.
And the last outcomes when we look, it's credit card limits, which is, the maximum amount of credit allowed for a credit card that it is decided by the financial institution, the bank. The higher is your credit score, the more money you make, the higher is the loan, the limit generally. And the limits will decrease if you become less trustworthy, okay? Just to give you an idea, this is the summary statistic of the outcomes. I think when we started looking at this question, I guess my question, maybe also of Brett and Poet, was, are we going to find any effect? Because if you think about these quantities, look at the median is 0 for most of them. So whatever we're going to measure are very tiny effects for a tiny part of the population, okay? So it wasn't clear a priori to me, at least, whether we will be able to measure something and see some effects, okay? How do we answer this question? We, of course, relied on the staggered legalization of sport gambling across states and implemented if and if, okay? Before and after and across states. Classically, standard identification assumptions, control outcomes are good counterfactual of treated units, and treatment time is exogenous. We're gonna do a couple of tests to show you that this is likely to be the case. If you remember how staggered if and if work, a benefit of it is that, not yet treated units are controlled in some time period and are treated in some other time, in a different time, which means that, because both never treated and not yet treated are controls, this reduces some issues with treatment unit being different from control units, okay? In addition to this, staggered if and if is generally implemented with two-way fixed effect. We know by now for probably there are a gazillion papers showing that two-way fixed effect can generate bias estimates when there is heterogeneity by group and time. So we rely on Callaway and Santana, which is most popular estimator out there, I think. It relaxes, it basically solves these heterogeneity issues, and it's simple to use and relies on relatively relaxed assumptions, okay? To perform our analysis and for tractability, we do a few things. First, we aggregate the data at the county level, and we weight county level observation by the population, just to avoid giving more power to counties with more population. And you can think about these average treatment effects as changes in individual credit health. A couple of identification checks before going into the results. Of course, there is self-selection, state decide whether to legalize or not. These two, Sridhar comment. We are worried about what drives this selection to the treatment, and whether this selection is, whether this factor affecting selection are correlated with the outcomes, right? States with more budgetary problems could have decided to legalize simply because they want to get more money. We perform two tests. First, we look at the difference between treated and control states across various welfare social assistance programs and fiscal policies also related to COVID. And then we try to predict whether the legalization timing can be predicted by factors that can affect consumer financial health. So this
Davide, did you also,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you also see any differences, look for differences across the degree of other forms of legalized gambling that is there in that state already? Because one of the factors that might have driven states to legalize sports gambling online is whether they have revenues from other kinds of, and also influence from, various groups that are. And the reason that matters is, to some extent, this kind of gambling might be a substitute for other forms of gambling that is already there in the state. I wonder if you looked at whether states, because I saw, for instance, there was no Nevada in the list of states that legalized gambling, just as a observation. But I don't know the extent to which states differ in terms of how many tribal casinos they have, how many legal casinos they have, versus and other forms of gambling, state lotteries too.
Yeah. As far as I remember, we didn't look into this. I mean, Nevada, we excluded it because basically gambling has been legal forever in some form or another, right? Other states, I don't remember. I don't think we looked into it, and I don't know. So your question is whether these differences can affect the results because there was some sort of
So
yeah.
if treated states differ systematically in the degree to which there is already other forms of gambling, and whether this just substitutes for whether there's an overall increase in the degree of gambling in that state versus just substitution from other forms. I think that's where I'm not kind of pointing this as a necessarily an issue with identification and so on. That's not the only thing I'm thinking about. I'm thinking more generally about, you know, how to interpret the results that you have.
One thing, I mean, we didn't look into it, but Poet, my student, collected a lot of information about lotteries and how much consumers spend on lotteries across states. Technically, we could look at these and whether, you know, states that legalize are more likely to have also a lot of spending on lotteries. Yeah, I guess this is an interesting question to look at it. So this is
some of the
yes.
some of the work that we had done had suggested if you just focus on the states that legalize retail sports betting and online sports betting at the same time, then you don't have to worry about offline sports betting in the pre-period being a substitute. And we found, you know, strong results. So yeah, I don't know. We didn't obviously do this specific analysis, but it certainly held up in that way. So it wouldn't rule out kind of other forms of gambling that are not either offline gambling or online gambling, but at least hopefully those are kind of the two of the bigger ones.
I see. Got it. So, okay, here, these are the fiscal policies that we compare across states. You know, COVID policies, unemployment insurance, and other type of policies for, you know, social policies. We don't find much differences. The only differences we find are about UI. And actually, we see that treated states have better policies than control states. So if you think that these policies are actually benefiting consumers, then our results are probably can be seen as a lower bound, right? They're probably downward bias. The second check is about, you know, predicting legalization. We look at COVID cases, weekly wages, and unemployment as predictor. In a simple hazard model, we find that none of these predict the legalization. So probably this legalization has to do with something else. Okay, let me go over the results. Again, we have these 8 outcomes across the categories. We start with a credit score. For all this analysis, I'm going to show you even studies. I don't have estimates, but I'm going to try to put them into context when I can. Every one of these plots will have even studies for 8 quarters before and 16 quarters after legalization, which happens at quarter 0. We're going to look at online access and all states. All states is the red line. Online access is the green or blue line. Okay. And on y-axis, the y-axis, we're going to have the percentage change for the measure we are looking at. In this case, we are looking at credit score. A couple of things to say here. Pre-trend look reasonable. We expect estimates in the pre-treatment period to be around 0 and they are. After legalization, we see a downward trend for both treatment, with online access being relatively stronger than all state access. Okay. To put this into context, we see a 0.3% decline overall, and which becomes about 1% if we focus on online access. What does it tell us is that, overall, it seems that the financial health of consumer is going down after legalization. Let's look at some of these indicators of excessive debt, whether consumer debt is increasing. The first is bankruptcies. Again, similar plot. Pre-treatment look reasonable, around 0. And again, in this case, we see that online access effect are much larger. Also, for when we focus on states that legalize any sort of gambling, we see pretty much none results. To put this into context, the likelihood of bankruptcy increases by as much as 25 to 30% when compared to pre-treatment periods. So these are large changes. Of course, the baseline of bankruptcies is very tiny, so even a small effect become large in terms of percentages. Collections, same. We see that most of the negative effect is driven by online access. The AT&T is about 10% of online access, or about $30 using pre-treatment average collection amount, which is $360. Credit card delinquencies, we see pretty much at 0 effect for all state, if in anything, a negative effect for online access. This may seem strange. I'm gonna show you later why this may happen, but basically I think the story is that financial institutions are trying to protect themselves against consumers that become less trustworthy, and therefore reduce credit card limit in order to avoid this type of delinquencies.
Davide, on the collections, is that driven by the intensive or extensive margin? Can you see if it's like more people in collections or a higher average balance?
That's a good question. Do I have an answer? I don't think I have an answer. I think this is extensive, right? We look at the percentage of collection accounts rather than the quantity, right, Brett? Do you remember? I don't remember. I think it's extensive, but not 100% sure. Auto loans go up for both treatments. All states seems a little bit larger, but there is a lot of noise. So the effect are about 9%, 5% for all states versus online access when compared to pre-treatment averages. Debt consolidation loans, they go up more or less in the same way for both treatment. The effects are about 10% increase, again, compared to pre-treatment averages. The ratio of secured to unsecured loans, same story. It goes up. We see a 3.6% increase for all state and 2% for online access compared to pre-treatment period. Credit card limit, going back to the effect on delinquencies. As you can see, it goes down, which suggests again that financial institutions like bank are taking precautions against consumer becoming less trustworthy and reduce these credit card limits, which may also lead to a reduction in delinquencies. Okay. Any questions? The AT&T is about 1.6% decline for all state and 2.7% decline for online access.
Just a quick clarification. When you say all states, is it every single state or just the ones that were not treated?
No, all states. Yeah, this name should change. Right? When we say all states, we refer to the treatment is the first month in which they legalize any sort of gambling, online or offline. And we are referring to the 33 states that legalize. This analysis includes also never treated states. So basically all 50 states excluding Nevada. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And while I have you, I might as well ask.
Yeah.
sports betting is typically very cash intensive activity. So how do you think about people moving from what they might have been doing in a cash business, moving into an online app like DraftKings or FanDuel? And that movement to the online space is just now allows their online activity to be tracked, and they're more likely to get into this system of credit scores and track delinquencies and all that stuff. I mean, people might have been handling bankruptcies and auto loan issues with cash prior to this, but now, now they have a credit line, and now it's a little bit different. So another way to think about it, are people just becoming a little more comfortable with their finances in an online tracked world?
And what this will mean? What's the argument? Sorry, I'm trying to understand.
No, I don't even know if I'm thinking about it the right way, but basically, if all these people were operating fully offline prior to online betting, they might have been handling lots of aspects of their financial lives offline.
Okay.
This is kind of similar to the argument we talked about earlier about who exactly is being tracked with their credit history, and who are we actually seeing here? And are we just, finding people that have moved online in a sense? And it might be important because sports betting is a very cash heavy activity to begin with. It's a big question, so I don't like expect that.
So basically, you're saying the composition of the panel could have changed because people behavior change and they become more comfortable using, credit card.
Yeah, because I can imagine when you have to open some of these accounts, I don't know if they check credit, or I don't know how they verify people beyond saying you have a bank account. Maybe I opened a bank account because I had to get into this betting world. Now that I have a bank account, I don't even know how to use that, so I'm more likely to run into financial issues because of that. Could have a cascading effect.
Yeah, potentially. I mean,
if I can jump in here, you have age, right? If you can potentially use that. Most people started their credit profiles once they turn 18 with, student loans, credit cards, and so on and so forth. To kind of avoid this type of individuals, you can probably set, some sort of threshold. If they are kind of way beyond the common threshold and they just start using, say, credit card right around the time of the policies, then you can, as robustness, try to limit samples away from these individuals.
Yeah, I mean,
if that's a concern.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point.
One simple issue will be to just have a balanced panel that starts with consumers that we see in 2016 and not add more consumers as we move forward, right? If you do a test like this, then the panel of consumer is fixed. I don't remember if we did this kind of test, but that should be doable to do. If you are really worried that the composition is changing a lot, you can just test the composition in the pre-treatment period and see if results are the same. That's something we can definitely do, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
we can simply check, right? Do these incidents really happen after the policy starts?
Yes, I mean, these are things we can definitely check, but again, yeah, and it should be easy to account for composition effects. Yeah, I do not remember.
Yeah, so Wayne, we do require the people in the final sample we use to have an account, at least an account open, during the whole period before and after, and that they don't move states. So I don't think anything we're finding is driven by people entering the panel suddenly because of gambling has caused them to join the formal credit system. There could be additional effects that are not captured by what we're looking at, because we are sort of looking at a balanced panel over the whole period.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think because Dan and I were spending a lot of time on this type of thing with our data too, is that it can affect existing gamblers and new gamblers quite differently. So
Yeah.
just something to think about.
No, and I think, one of the arguments people make about the pro-legalization argument, one of them is that, well, people are gambling anyways with cash, and this brings them into a regulated system. But so our results suggest that that is not, that does not hold water, in the sense that we find, at least for our panel, there are significant decreases in several measures of financial health. So if people were gambling before, it's not just that they're doing it in a regulated setting now. If that was the case, then we wouldn't expect to find anything, right? And we do find these decreases. So this sort of, people were doing this with cash before, now they're doing it with credit. That doesn't seem supported by our results.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, another thing, I think your data Wayne is better in the sense that I think you can identify gamblers, right? Because you see transactions. We cannot really identify gamblers. So
Yeah, that's true.
right. So if we can see them entering the panel, but we don't know whether they actually are gamblers or not, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
So in some sense, yes, that's.
There's also a question from the chat that
Yes.
asks if you use any balancing variables to balance the pre-treatment observations and what things are used in the treatment model.
Well, you say it again? I don't see the question. Can you repeat it?
It's in the Q&A, I ask, have you used any balancing factors / variables to balance the pre-treatment observations? If yes, may I know what variables did you use in the treatment model? I guess this person is thinking about the synthetic control type of scenario.
I've used a balancing factor variable.
If all the
we are not
observations
balancing.
are kind of equally weighted.
So the only weight that we do is we weight countries by population. We weight counties by population, right, to account for the size of the counties. Other than that, there is no balancing done between treated and controls. In staggered adoption, matching and this kind of approaches, I don't think they're super useful, because you're gonna just match never treated with eventually treated. There is still all the group that that move from not yet treated to treated. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay, Q&A. Just to recap, we find evidence consistent with consumer financial health deteriorating, credit score goes down. The effect of sports betting does not appear to be driven by higher delinquencies, but exposure to more debt. And the fact that credit card delinquencies are unaffected is likely due to the fact that financial institutions are responding to lower consumer trustworthiness in terms of financial trustworthiness by lowering their credit limits to protect themselves. And we do see that online access in general seems to make things worse, which I think is consistent with some of other recent papers looking at the same policy. The last thing we do, again, simply because most of the literature, when we talk about who is the consumer that are more affected, they find that are young men, low-income population. We're going to look at some of these dimensions. We mostly focus on demographic data, which is age and gender. Again, simply because young men and low-income individuals seems to be more susceptible to gambling. And so we basically repeated analysis for different groups. As you may imagine, when you start splitting the data, our data effects are not larger. We are going to see pretty large standard errors. So most of the heterogeneity analysis in terms of difference across groups is most of the time not statistically different. But if you look at where the coefficient move, I think the results are consistent with what the literature says, that, and I put in the red box, men under 45 and low-income men under 45 do seem to be the category where the movement are larger, despite, again, standard errors increasing quite a bit because the groups are becoming, are making the data smaller, okay? So that's the last piece of evidence that we provide. Again, this seems consistent with most of the literature that look at gambling in the past. Yeah, that's it, I think. So just to recap here, we look at the recent legalization of sports gambling in the United States using a pretty detailed panel of financial information about a representative sample of US consumers. Overall, we find that financial health decreases we find low credit scores, more debt, less access to credit. Online access seems to be more problematic than offline. And of course, this is an important trade-off for states, right? States are legalizing sports gambling because they want more revenue, but this affects consumer financial health, which may require states to spend more money to support this type of consumers. So I think states should think carefully about how they legalize and pros and cons of this legalization. And that's more or less what I had for you today, guys. Let me know if you have any other questions.
Thank you so much. You're doing fantastic on time. So if you have questions, please feel free to jump in. And if anybody on the attendee list have questions, you can continue to use the Q&A, or if you want to be promoted to the panelists, you can raise your hand and we'll get to you.
Davide, I had a question about the types of gambling that are in your data. Do you see anything about what types of gambling, how frequently, yeah, basically what are these, what games are these, and do they vary across states?
So unfortunately, our data is not like Daniel and the Wayne data, right? They have credit card data and they observe where consumers spend their money. We do not observe transaction data, so we don't know whether a consumer is actually a gambler or not. Right?
Okay.
That's a limitation of our data. We see outcomes, we don't see what consumers are actually doing. I think in Wayne data, they do see transactions, and this helps them do something different than what we do, right? Yeah. So again, this population is likely very small, right? Past literature say 1% of the US population. So we have about 4 million consumers. We are going to talk about, few thousand of them, but we cannot identify them. I think we talked a few times about doing something to, maybe use some of these outcomes to identify them, but this will be just a probabilistic model that tell us whether it's more likely to be a gambler or not, but we don't see the transactions. Right? Yeah. And I don't think it's even possible. And I don't think it's possible. It's definitely not possible to combine our data with Wayne data and identify them.
Yeah. I think this is a stretch, but I was thinking of in terms of a policy implication. Could states do something like disallow gambling disallow betting on your home team or something like that, just to remove the emotional aspect of
Honestly, look, again, I don't bet. I don't know much about. I started reading a little bit about gambling, and I think one of the main problems is how online apps keep you addicted and keep you playing by give you free money basically. I read an article about one specific case of a woman. I think I don't remember where. Was basically a story telling the readers that you try to quit, but the app comes back and gives you more money to keep playing. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. I don't know whether, probably emotional factors play a role too, but sure. But I think this giving you money every time you're left with little or no money to keep playing is the big issue.
right.
I wonder
we
if
think
there's any outside statistics you can collect on things like advertising spend or incentives at an aggregated level to get a sense of the extent of the treatment.
This is a follow-up question. We have discussed this with Brett, and would be nice to do something. I think the question is whether we're gonna see we have good advertising data and whether the effects are large enough to be captured. But there is definitely, I mean, for what I see in LA, and I don't know, in LA now on the buses, you see advertising of FanDuel or whatever apps that are betting apps. So I think advertising spending is growing. Whether this is driving a lot of the effect that we see I think is an open question. I don't know. Possibly.
Yeah, there's also a question that Gary asked. If you want to stop sharing, you can perhaps also see the Q&As.
Oh, I see the Q&A now.
Yeah, so he's asking why are the effects so similar between men and women when we know that men are more likely to gamble?
Oh,
And
that's the question.
about this kind of within household spillover.
Okay, remind me.
But I don't think you see that from the credit panel data, right? So it's all individual. You don't really know who are in the same household.
Yes, he has a good point about single versus married, and we did something. I forgot it now. Brett, do you remember what was the answer?
Yeah, I mean, it does look like there's intra-household spillovers, especially for some of these things like bankruptcies. We find much larger gender differences when we look at single households compared to married households. But that's also an endogenous variable, so it's it's a choice to be married. It's associated with a lot of life outcomes. So it's not we don't really highlight that, but it does seem like some of the kind of puzzling similarities in gender are caused by these spillovers within the household. And the other sort of intriguing thing is that some states have iGaming, which is like casino games on these apps as well, and at least there's anecdotes out there that these are much more commonly used by women. So men bet on sports and women bet on these games. And these games are sometimes seen as quite addictive. So it's possible that there's compositional differences in gambling that we're still looking into this. We actually are trying to estimate this right now, but that's something we're looking into, is whether iGaming helps explain the lack of differences in the effects across the genders.
Yeah, Garrett is a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question, though.
Any more questions?
Well, if not, thanks again so much for super interesting talk, and let's close out our fall semester of VQMS. We'll have a new lineup out announced very soon for the spring semester, so stay tuned.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.